Amend the Mass Media Group is California Capital's premier YouTube channel focused on reparations, dedicated to political advocacy and apologetically aimed at shining a spotlight on our righteous justice claim for reparations. Tune in to ETM Media Group YouTube channel Tuesdays at 9 p.m. PST.
We do show intros, show outros, voiceover, script copy, 15 and 30-second promos. Check us out at etmmediagroup.com. That's etmmediagroup.com for more info and updates and to get involved. Welcome, everybody. Another show from Eman the Mass Media Group, and I think Kim, you might be on mute.
I am on mute. Hashy square low, though, my
Actually, square
friend.
below. Unless you wanted to be on mute the whole time, which you could have, and I could have let you go on mute the whole time, but I wouldn't do that to you.
All right. I noticed it myself anyways, because
Oh, that's funny. Should we get right into the news because we got a lot in the can that we about to unravel and cook up.
let's do it.
So, Alec Baldwin shooting, latest Santa Fe district attorney says criminal charges are on the table. A principal actor on Rust has said that a scene where he was shot at in the movie felt life-threatening. N.A. Hudson, who played an outlaw in the film, recalled an experience on set when he was exposed to gunfire while the camera and crew were protected by a shield. That made me question me being in front of the camera and being between all of that fire. When the rounds were released, I did feel the blanks hitting my face and my body, Hudson told TMZ. Safety practices on the set of Rust are being investigated by authorities in New Mexico after cinematographer Halna Hutchins, may she rest in peace, was shot dead on the set on Thursday. Alec Baldwin, an actor and producer on Rust, had been practicing a cross-draw weapons firing technique and was aiming at a camera when a prop gun went off, killing Hutchins and wounding director Joel Souza. Since the incident, it has emerged that the assistant director who handled Baldwin, the gun that killed Hutchins, had been sacked from a film in 2019 after a prop gun accidentally fired on the set of the movie Freedman's Path, injuring a crew member. Authorities in Santa Fe have released statements by Rust director Joel Souza and a cameraman who said last week's accidental shooting happened during a scene filmed inside a mock church. On Sunday, hundreds attended a vigil for cinematographer Hutchins in Albuquerque, New Mexico. An investigation into the shooting is continuing.
Tragic. I saw on some news they were interviewing some spokesperson and asking what they thought should happen, and she was like, someone's dead. Someone needs to go to jail. All right. Activists scale government building in climate protests. London. Climate activists in hard hats scaled a UK government building Tuesday, unfurling a banner demanding that countries attending the upcoming UN climate conference invest in plant-based alternatives to meat. The activists campaigning for animal rebellion climbed between 10 meters and 20 meters, 32 feet to 65 feet, up a latticework decoration of the building, which houses the Department for Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs. The activists are an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, which has blocked traffic, disrupted public transport, and set up encampments to gain attention and press for stronger action against climate change. The climbers hung a large yellow banner reading COP26, Invest in Plant-Based Future. No arrests have been made. The group said its protest will remain in place until Prime Minister Boris Johnson pledges to urge all world leaders to end meat and dairy subsidies at upcoming COP26 summit next week in Scotland.
All right, so gas prices continue to rise in California, most expensive in the U.S. California is a state with the highest average cost for regular grade gas at $4.54 per gallon, according to AAA. Oklahoma has the lowest average cost of $3, and the national average is $3.39 per gallon of regular grade fuel. The average price has increased 17 consecutive days and 22 of the past 23. It has risen 14.9 cents over the past 23 days to its highest amount since October 19th, 2012, according to the figures from the AAA and Oil Price Information Service. The average price is 6.1 cents more than 1 week ago, 15.5 cents higher than 1 month ago, and $1,335 greater than 1 year ago. The rising gas prices are caused by high crude oil prices. The price of a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude for November delivery on the New York Mercantile Exchange rose 6 of the past 7 trading sessions, including increasing $1.26 Friday to settle at $83.76. Its second highest settlement price of the year, behind only Wednesday's price at $83.87 settlement price.
Oh man, we need them Teslas. Also in gas news, gas prices in California town hit $7.59. This is in Gorda, California. And it's much higher in the rural town of Gorda, where the cost of a gallon is mind numbing $7.59 a gallon. KFSN reported. That's for regular. Premium gas tops off at $8.50 per gallon, the television station reported. And you cannot go across town to shop for cheaper gas. The gas station in Gorda is the only one in town.
Yeah, that's crazy. It looks like Gorda. We just looked it up previously, and it's like a unincorporated town or city, or I don't know what it's called. But I think that'd be very interesting if we looked, did some research on what an incorporated town is, and to see if that's something that, if Black people do get reparations, if that's something that would be a possibility.
When Black people get reparations. And
When let's be
also on
positive.
this picture here, it's saying California, Hawaii, and Nevada pay the most for gas. Okay, let's see who can afford these gas prices. The wealthiest 10% of Americans own a record 89% of all U.S. stocks. The wealthiest 10% of Americans now own 89% of all U.S. stocks held by households, a record high that highlights the stock market's role in increasing wealth inequity. The top 1% gained more than $6.5 trillion in corporate equities and mutual funds wealth during the COVID-19 pandemic, while the bottom 90% added 1.2 trillion, according to the latest data from the Federal Reserve. The share of corporate equities and mutual funds owned by the top 10% reached the record high in the second quarter, while the bottom 90% of Americans held about 11% of individually held stocks, down from 12% before the pandemic. The stock market, which has doubled since the March 2020 drop and is up nearly 40% since January 2020, was the main source of wealth creation in America during the pandemic, as well as the main driver of inequality. The total wealth at the top 1% now tops 32%, a record, according to Fed data. Nearly 70% of their wealth gains over the past year and a half, one of the fastest wealth booms in recent history, came from the stocks. The top 1% own a lot of stocks. The rest of us own a little, said Stephen Rosenthal, Senior Fellow, Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center.
Black leaders slammed Governor Newsom for vetoing major civil rights bill. Supporters of a bill that would have increased diversity among civil service employees at all levels across California state government are blasting Governor Newsom for vetoing the legislation. Assemblymember Chris Holden introduced the legislation, which would have required all state boards and commissions to have at least one member from an underrepresented community. Called the, quote, upward mobility, end quote, bill. Supporters say the legislation would have also opened up pathways to blacks and other minorities for promotions, higher salaries, and recruitment for state government jobs. For Black Californians, Assembly Bill AB 105 was particularly critical and historic, supporters say. Quote, I am very disappointed. Look at Section 6 of the bill. We worked with the bill's author to include a language in AB 105 that would have disaggregated the Black or African American category and created a specific way for gathering information on Black folks who descend from U.S. slavery and who experienced Jim Crow in the Deep South and elsewhere, said Chris Lodson, a Sacramento-based community organizer for the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, CJEC, and the American Redress Coalition of California, ARCC. Shout out to Chris Lodson.
Shout out, Chris. Where you at, Chris? You supposed to be here. But anyways, it's all good. New York Police Union sues city to fight vaccine mandate. New York City's largest police union sued the city on Monday to stop the implementation of a draconian COVID-19 vaccine mandate. The Police Benevolent Association, which represents 24,000 NYPD officers, filed the lawsuit on the day hundreds of demonstrators marched across the Brooklyn Bridge and to City Hall in protest of vaccine mandate ordered by Mayor Bill de Blasio. The vaccine mandate requires city employees to show proof of vaccination or else be placed on unpaid leave. The mandate will go into effect November 1st. Previously, NYPD officers were able to opt out of the vaccine mandate by taking routine COVID-19 tests. However, de Blasio announced last week a new vaccine mandate for all city workers, which includes the police and firefighters, with more stringent requirements. City employees will receive an extra $500 in their paychecks for receiving the first shot, de Blasio said in a press release, adding that this benefit will end at 5 p.m. on Friday, by which point city employees are required to have proof of at least one dose.
Dads on duty show Louisiana high school students they have someone in their corner. After multiple fights at Southwood High School in Shreveport, Louisiana, resulted in the arrest of 23 students, a group of about 40 dads stepped up to put a stop to the violence. Known as Dads on Duty, the men are on campus from the time students first arrive to when they go home for the day, taking shifts to ensure there are always several fathers at the school. The dads are there to lift spirits, tell jokes, dole out advice, and just let the kids know there's someone looking out for them. Michael Lafitte told CBS News he started Dads on Duties because we decided the best people who can take care of kids are us. Since the group formed, there have been no fights on campus, with one student explaining the school has just been happy and you could feel it. Shout out to those fathers out there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Let's take a look at the little video that corresponds with Dads on Duty.
A bunch of DADs. Here's CBS's Steve Hartman on the road.
Not many good news stories begin in such a bad news way. It happened last month here at Southwood High School in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Plagued with violence.
Over the course of 3 days,
Another fight.
23 students arrested for fighting.
Massive police response to
But strangely, there hasn't been another incident since. Perhaps in part because of this most unusual crisis intervention team.
Nobody here has a degree in school counseling. No majors in criminal justice.
No.
Your qualifications are?
With dads, we decided the best people who can take care of our kids are who? For us. What we do.
So Michael Lafitte started Dads on Duty,
We're out doing what we do for our babies.
a group of about 40 Southwood dads who now hang out at the school in shifts.
Let's go.
Today, any negative energy that enters the building has to run a gauntlet of good parenting.
What's going on, buddy?
You moving fast. I like that horse.
I immediately felt a form of safety.
We stopped fighting, people started going to class.
How could that be?
You ever heard of a look?
A look? Dads have the power to do that?
Yes. Not many people know it, but yes.
Let's go, let's go.
But it's not just the firm stares and stern warnings.
Let's make it to class, my son.
It's also the dad jokes.
They just make funny jokes like, oh, hey, your shoe's untied, but it's really not untied.
And they hate it. They're so embarrassed by it.
And it's that perfect mix of tough love and gentle ribbing that dads do so well that has helped transform this school.
The school has really just been like happy and you can feel it.
Which is why the dads plan to keep coming to Southwood indefinitely.
Because not everybody has the father figure at home.
Or a male, period, in their life.
So just to be here makes a big difference.
Do you think you stumbled onto something here?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
They'd like to start chapters of Dads on Duty throughout Louisiana
What's up, baby boy?
and hope to eventually take on the country
All right.
without a fight. Steve Hartman, on the road in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Yeah, they need to roll that out across the nation and pay these men for their
Yeah,
service.
definitely.
All right. After weeks of investigation, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, along with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and state and local partners, have traced the source of a major salmonella outbreak to whole red, white, and yellow onions distributed by ProSource Inc. and imported from Chinawa, something, Mexico. Since the CDC,
Chihuahua, I think.
Chihuahua. Okay, we'll go with that. Since the CDC recorded 20 salmonella, let me see here, Orienberg infections on September 2nd, the number have grown rapidly to 652 infections, including at least 129 who have recorded hospitalization. Those who have fallen ill range in age from younger than 1 year to 91 years old, with a median age of 37. Nearly 6 in 10 are female. So far, no one has died. While cases have been recorded in 37 states, the produce was distributed nationwide, so all Americans may be at risk. Texas has the most cases with 158. Other states with relatively high counts include Oklahoma, 98, Virginia, 59, Maryland, 48, and Illinois, 37. Although ProSource Inc., also known as ProSource, that's a tongue twister.
I know, huh?
ProSource Produce LLC of Haley, Idaho, has been named as a source. Investigators are working to determine if other onions or suppliers are linked to this outbreak. Throw away any unlabeled onions at home, tweeted the CDC. Do not eat, sell, or serve red, white, or yellow onions imported from Mexico and distributed U.S.-wide by ProSource Inc. ProSource Inc. has agreed to voluntarily recall red, yellow, and white onions imported from the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, with import dates from July 1st, 2021 through August 27, 2021. Descriptions of these onion types include, but are not limited to, jumbo, colossal, medium, and sweet onions. All right, throw those onions out, everyone. And that's in the news.
All right, so we are back at it again, and today, or actually tonight, depending on where you're at in the world, we will be talking about not that wrong one. I think we talked about the veto. What was that last week?
Yeah, that was it. Where is the one we hit? Here we go. Here we go.
So this is what we're going to be talking about. And actually, we're going to be playing some clips. So if anybody wants to call in, please let us know while the show is going on what you think about some of the testimonies when we do play them. And yeah, we're also going to be talking about the subpoena process with the DOJ for those who actually did not see it, and to see what basically the task force has to work with regarding subpoenas, and hopefully get your opinion on that.
All right. So these are some of the expert witnesses that will be taking quick clips of their videos. We had Mersha Baradaran,
Yes.
William Spriggs, Jacqueline Jones, Terrence Dean, Thomas Kramer, Kavon Ward, and this gentleman's name is Paul Austin.
Yep.
All right, so let's just go through a few of these and then talk about the subpoena power.
And the gentlewoman who is in front of my great grandmother on the right, the shorter woman, is Emma James Wade. She's going to be important for this story at the moment that I'm going to talk about. She was a school teacher in Alabama, a certified school teacher in 1899 in Alabama. When we look at the 1940s, this was the occupation teaching of Blacks who had college degrees for the most part. Well over half of Blacks were teachers if they had a college degree. 76% of Blacks with a bachelor's degree were teachers if they lived in the South. 28% of all Blacks were teachers in the South. This is key because it gets to state action. This is discrimination that limited the mobility of educated Blacks, the most educated, those with a college degree, before 1940. If we look at what that pay looked like, this is 1940 pay of college graduates. These are sort of major occupations that college graduates had at the time. You will see the red line indicates the pay for teachers. And if you look in the South, you see that white teachers with college degrees were paid about $1,200 a year in 1940, compared to Blacks who are paid somewhere close to $760 a year. Outside the South, you see that Blacks did better, but that's a clear indication of what's going on here. If Blacks could move to the outside of the South as teachers, they gain quite a bit in pay. In fact, they would be paid much more than white college educated teachers in the South. Why didn't they just move? And this gets to the act of discrimination in hiring Black teachers. The primary role of Black teachers was to teach Black school children in the South. And so they were constrained, they were prevented from taking their skills and their talent across state lines and enjoying their skills. Oddly, the most skilled workers in this scenario didn't migrate.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
So speaking of state discrimination, didn't you say at one point that you can even be a Black teacher in Sacramento, right here in Sacramento where we're at?
Yeah, my grandmother in the Great Migration in the 50s moved to Sacramento. And at the time, according to my dad, she couldn't get a job in Sacramento because it was just racist. So she actually had to go to Stockton to teach until a gentleman, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, came and sued the Sacramento school district, saying that, you know, it had discriminatory practices. And so after that lawsuit was made against the city, then I think individuals like my grandmother and I believe Dr. Cornell West's mother as well, Mrs. West, may she rest in peace. Actually, individuals like that were able to then teach here in Sacramento. But, you know, I mean, my grandmother was brilliant, and I'm not just saying that because I'm her grandson, and may she rest in peace too. But I mean, she's just a brilliant woman, and same with you know, Mrs. West. So you had individuals coming into Sacramento who were willing to work and ready to work and were skilled, you know, professionals in the educational system. And unfortunately, due to racism, they had to leave outside of Sacramento and eventually, you know, come back to Sacramento.
Not much has changed in Sacramento. People willing to work, and especially in specific industries, willing and ready to work, can't get jobs. So they get paid less money, but had to spend more money in gas to get all the way to Stockton. Make it make sense.
Yep. So I think, who do we have coming up? Is it, I think Jacqueline Jones, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
The rape of women was an instrument of terrorism, but it was also a means of growing the enslaved workforce, thereby enriching the owner. Between 1619 and 1808, approximately 10 million men, women, and children were forcibly removed from Africa to the Americas. The vast majority went to the Caribbean and South America. Indeed, only about 4 to 6% of the total were transported to what would become the United States. Yet by 1865, the nation's Black population amounted to over 4.4 million people, revealing a dramatic pattern of natural growth over the generations. That number suggests the ardent labors of skilled hands, domestic servants, and bearers of children. Marked by shocking levels of sadism and sexual license, the system of slavery amounted to a form of state-sponsored domestic terrorism. Yet this system found favor with white Northerners, many of whom after 1790 or so benefited directly from the cotton economy, as sea captains, merchants, textile machine operatives, and consumers of cloth. The United States Constitution does not mention the word slavery, but the 1787 document did protect private property, which included enslaved workers. In 1790, Congress stipulated that only free white men should be allowed to immigrate to the United States and eventually apply for citizenship. At the local level, towns and counties sponsored slave patrols, who were groups of white men charged with recovering fugitives and maintaining a racialized order on the countryside.
State-sanctioned terrorism.
Yep, I don't know what we could say more to elaborate on that.
Reparations.
Reparations now.
The number of acres lost by Black farmers are tremendous. Millions of acres we owned after slavery. And then we were reduced to this day to maybe 17 or 18,000 farmers and a small degree of land. What I want to say to you is that the present lawsuits that are brought against Black farmers by frivolous and racist individuals around the country will not stop our drive in the struggle for Black farmers.
Black farming, you know, one of the great American pastimes that we've worked for, our ancestors worked free at. You know, we can't even get a due justice in something that should be a God-given right, if you believe in God, a human right, to sustain yourself.
Yeah, he had a very powerful testimony. It seemed like the USDA was really culpable in, a lot of the land theft and discriminatory practices. And it still goes on today. I mean, I even just saw a recent article where Black farmers are boycotting John Deere farming equipment because of more racist practices. Maybe we'll get that in the news coming up next. All right, you want to do a couple more here?
When the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, the Black community owned less than 1% of the United States' total wealth. More than 150 years later, that number has barely budged. The gap between average white wealth and Black wealth has increased over the last decades. Today, across every socioeconomic level, Black families have a fraction of the wealth of white families. And this wealth chasm doesn't abate with income or with education. In other words, this is a wealth gap that is very much tied to a history of exclusion and exploitation, and not to be remedied by higher education or higher income. Without targeted policies to close this wealth chasm, it will continue to grow. And I want to be clear about how this racial wealth gap was created. It was created, maintained, and perpetuated through public policy at the federal, state, and local level. Laws, policies, contracts, and the lack of protection of Black communities' property by the law, the enforced segregation by the federal and state bureaucracies that created a race-based bifurcated economy, created this historic racial wealth gap that self-perpetuates today without any necessity for added inputs. Black men and women have been shut out of most avenues of middle-class wealth creation. Black homes, farms, and savings were not given the full protection of the law, even as these properties were subject to racial terrorism. In employment, education, housing, farm loans, even patent rights, racist policies and practices have either shut Black communities out of the market entirely or offered them separate and subpar services.
Says it all. She was fire.
Mersha, I know I butchered her last name, but yeah.
Baradaran.
Okay. We have another clip with her, and like you said, she was really just spot on with all her analysis there.
Professor Baradaran, you mentioned that nothing short of full reparations would begin to close the wealth gap. And I was wondering if you might itemize what full reparations mean.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm going to go to some legal principles here. I teach contracts law to UCI Law School to 1Ls every year, and I've been teaching 2 sections this year, so this is all fresh in memory. In contracts, we have a form of damages where and this happens in complex litigation. If you look at any massive scale problem like the 9/11 loss of life or opiates, the legal system measures damages to make one whole. So if there's a contract breach, you pay damages to make that person who you breached against whole. Now, what does whole mean? Well, it is the lost things that they didn't get because of that breach. And if we look at the breach, I mean, we can go all the way back to the 1619 arrival of the first ships of human beings in chains, or we can go to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which were an explicit promise to Black communities for equal protection under the law, due process, and those were violated. That's breach. And so how do you make a community whole based on breach over and over again?
Breach of contract, family. Breach of contract.
All right, we want to do one more, or you want to talk about subpoena power? Speaking of breaches of contract, there's plenty of industries that need to be subpoenaed, and to, explain themselves and provide their data, so we can see, what's what.
Yeah, let's go into the subpoena process.
All right, let's take a quick look. Reparation Task Force, power to issue and enforce subpoenas.
All right, you want me to take this slide?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, task force power to obtain information. The task force is authorized by Government Code 8301 to obtain various types of information. The task force is empowered to request the attendance and testimony of witnesses. The task force is empowered to request a production of books, records, correspondence, memoranda, papers, and documents. The task force is empowered to acquire directly from the head of any state agency available information that the task force considers useful in the discharge of its duties. All state agencies shall cooperate with the task force with respect to such information and shall furnish all information requested by the task force to the extent permitted by law. The task force shall keep confidential any information received from a state agency that is confidential, exempt from the California Public Records Act.
So is that just state agencies then that can be subpoenaed? So we need to target those state agencies that control those industries or supposedly oversee these industries. All right, what else can the task force do? Task force's implied power to subpoena. Government Code Section 8301.3, AB 3121, Article 4 does not include an explicit authorization to obtain this information via a subpoena. However, it does implicitly authorize subpoenas because it sets forth the task force ability to seek an order from a superior court compelling testimony or compliance with the subpoena. Therefore, though not explicit in statute, the clear language authorizing the task force to compel compliance with a subpoena strongly implies the power to issue subpoenas.
All right. The task force power to obtain information. The task force is empowered to request the attendance and testimony of witnesses. The task force is empowered to request the production of books, records, correspondence, memoranda, papers, and documents, as previously stated. The task force is empowered to acquire directly from the head of any. Oh, I thought, okay, this was a. Let's go to the next slide. I think this was one of the same slides. Let's see, is this another slide?
That looks like the one that I just...
Let's go to the next slide.
All right.
Okay. What can the task force subpoena? Witness attendance and testimony. Location must be reasonable to avoid witnesses having to travel too far. Documents, as previously stated, books, records, correspondence, etc. Likely only applies to entities in California who conduct activity in California or whose activity affects California residents. So it looks like predominantly the subpoena is going to be California related state agencies so far. Yeah.
All right. So we need to be thinking about who we want to recommend, get that subpoena notice. All right, let's go to another video here. Stefan Menedinian.
3 specific figures I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a chart I put together specifically for this presentation. In 2016, the average Black household net worth was $138,000, while the mean white household net worth was $933,000, $934,000, a relative disparity of 7 times. And by the way, this data is from the Federal Reserve's Consumer Finance Survey, and I have 2019 data I'm going to show you in a moment. But the median difference, not the mean difference. Obviously, the mean difference is affected by extremely wealthy white people, but if you just look at median, the disparity is even greater. The typical white family had wealth median of 171,000, whereas the typical Black family median had only wealth of 17,000 in 2016. When you exclude housing as part of that wealth, the disparity reaches its zenith of nearly 18 and a half, leaving Black wealth at just $930 per family. I put this together. I was yesterday specifically for this talk, so this has never been created before to the best of my knowledge. But one of the things I wanted to share about this is look at where Black wealth was after the subprime mortgage crisis, just at $2,200 median per family. Now, the good news is it's gone up, and the good news is the disparity ratio has gone down, but notice that the absolute disparity continues to increase. So a focus on the disparity ratio actually masks significant increases in the absolute disparity.
Yeah, well, they've got all the wealth because they've got all the stocks now, all the stonks.
I've been privileged to attend schools where majority of my teachers were Black, but I have friends who they didn't have that privilege. And so their teachers didn't understand where they were coming from when they would come to school and have issues that pertain to a certain upbringing. The teacher wasn't able to meet that student where they were at. And so it began this disconnect and this disengagement within the classroom. And so I think as we talk about reparations, we really need to be intentional about who is educating our students, who are educating the Black students in the classrooms. And so we need to also make sure that our expert educators that have the wherewithal, that have the cultural understanding of what it means to be Black, of the Black experience, they are placed in schools where they're needed the most. And so I think that is the conversation that we need to have. We no longer can talk about or sit back and pontificate and talk about peeling back layers and actually not following through with that. For me, at this point, I believe that we must uproot this current system and do away with it. It has proven to be archaic. It has proven to be anti-Black. It has proven to be capitalist. It has shown its head through and through. And so now it's a matter of if and when we're ready, we must reimagine what it means to be free. We must reimagine what it means for reparation, or what it means to actually have reparations, to actualize that, and not to just sit there and pontificate.
So, yep, I'm going to put this back up. Dads on duty. That was just a great example, right, of what I believe, Kawika Smith, and shout out to the youth in the building.
Shout out to the youth.
We got to give our youth, the credit, more credit than I think, sometimes.
Yeah, they understand what's going on. They understand more than we know. And like he said, throw the whole system in the trash.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was, as I said before, with the dads on duty, Kawika Smith was saying, people involved in our community who understand about, the culture and that understand and that actually care about, what's going on with their children, and not only their children, but the extension of their community. I think at one point, I can't speak for any other community because I, grew up pretty much in the Black community. Part of our thing, and I can't speak for anybody else, but like even people who aren't so-called our, blood relatives, we call them family. That's just our thing, and so if you don't understand that kind of cultural context, dealing with, as Kawika Smith, you don't understand about it, then it might rub some people the wrong way, or there might be some confrontation. They're dealing with these people because they don't have any experience with them, and that's beyond color. I mean, if you, whatever culture that you come from, if you don't, at least if you can't empathize, then you at least need to sympathize. But if you have no sympathetic nature about yourself, then, it does no good, especially in education.
Right. That's why that dad's program should be rolled out across the nation. I mean, that is a great example of, the community being involved in making a difference.
Exactly.
My mom has struggled all her life to pay the rent after my brother died and has not received any support. And we would love to keep building our life. In 2001, I was adopted from an abusive family. I've always had a discomfort towards cops due to my brother being shot and killed in 1994 by LA County Sheriff deputies. They let him bleed out as no ambulances were called. My brother was 20 when he died. Police contact is also the reason why I was pushed out of high school. And then I made these mistakes because I was out of school and the lack of resources in the community that I have left the community are out of reach for me. If schools were more accessible and more accountable for Black students, it would have been more easier for me to navigate. What I want to see for myself is someone held accountable for my brother, properly investigated and to sue them. My mother was grieving for the loss of her son, who didn't have the money and there was hidden information. I would like the process to be easier to hold people to their accountability. What I wish their school provided for me when I was there was real counselors, after school programs, real nurses, Black people history, peace building, and TJ practice, and etc. More. And having these experiences make me question why the police at school, why are there police at school? Why the California government doesn't have resources to help low-income communities like mine? Why is it when I walk communities, I see liquor stores broke down, cars always construction repaired on messed up streets, no fresh food markets, the same junk food every day? How can you be 18 and smoke a cigarette, 17 and join the army, but California has no minimum age for sending children to juvie?
Black Jackson, his testimony was heart-wrenching.
Shout out to Black Jackson.
Also the essence of reparations itself, to restore and repair, in part by distributing fair compensation for what is owed. From the outset, I believe it's imperative to arrive at a consensus of what we're talking about when we use the term as charged as reparations. According to the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, or NCOBRA, reparations is a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, institutions, and families. Those groups that have been injured have the right to obtain from the government, corporation, institution, or family responsible for these injuries that they need to repair and heal themselves. Now, despite the fact that NCOBRA has been in existence since 1987, and despite the fact that former Congressman John Conyers of Michigan introduced H.R. 40, a bill that simply calls for a commission to study reparations every year since 1989 until his death in 2019, too often the polity of this nation has perambulated the issue of reparations with ambiguous innuendos and references. Even white progressives are circumspect when it comes to uttering the phrase reparations. It's literally like the Voldemort of political discourse for far too many white lawmakers and white people as a whole.
Next.
Anthony Roger Wright had some good points.
Presenting today is sort of a love letter to Black Oaklanders who wrestled with internalized racism when institutionalized and structural racism was so pervasive, it was in the air they breathed and the ground that they walked on. My work focuses on the relationship between race, class, housing, and access to green space in Oakland, California from 1937 to 2020. Because of this long historical view, I was able to identify reoccurring patterns in which low-income residents, communities of color, and particularly African-American citizens were habitually excluded from and dispossessed of home ownership, quality housing, and healthy green environments, while also having their housing, neighborhoods, and lives compromised by environmental harms. I've connected these patterns into three distinct eras. 1937 to 1968, when Oakland was a legally segregated city, 1977 to 1999, when Oakland was a chocolate city, and 2005 to 2020, when Oakland adopted an environmental agenda and started to recognize itself as a top green city, and this era is still unfolding. In 1937, the Hulk security grades codified the bifurcation of Oakland into differently valued landscapes. The hills became the location of the most desirable neighborhoods, and the flats were the neighborhoods declining in value and the least desirable neighborhoods.
The actions of the U.S. Navy and the city of San Francisco as they created public housing to accommodate wartime workers. This demographic pattern hardened as the Homeowners Loan Corporation redlined Hunters Point, and as the Federal Housing Administration and U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs denied African Americans home ownership in most suburbs. Over a 30-year period, the federal government issued $120 billion in home loans, 98% of which went to white Americans. The segregation and concentration of Black residents in Bayview magnified when the Western Addition in the Fillmore area, which also had been redlined because of the presence of Black residents, underwent a devastating transformation. At the time, a thriving cultural center for the city's Black residents and businesses, the Western Addition and Fillmore, along with other urban areas in the rest of the nation considered, quote, slums, were demolished for development funding under the federal 1949 Housing Act, for then the largest redevelopment project on the West Coast.
Bootstrapping.
Then I divided each group's average household wealth figure by the average household size in 2019 based on US Census figures. Next slide, please. And arrived at an average per capita wealth gap of $358,293. Next slide. In other words, if the goal of reparations to African American descendants of the enslaved in the US is the elimination of the wealth gap, net reparations would have to amount to at least $358,293 per eligible recipient. I cannot know ahead of time how many people will be eligible, and eligibility criteria may be in flux for a while. So I'm using readily available numbers from the US Census to estimate the number of African American descendants of the enslaved in the US. I take the number of non-Hispanic Blacks or African Americans in the US Bureau of the Census's count, which in 2019 amounted to approximately 41 million individuals. This will inevitably include some Black people without enslaved ancestors in the US, but it may miss some otherwise eligible individuals as well. So this is a very rough estimate. With this estimate, an amount of roughly $14.7 trillion would be sufficient to close the average per capita Black-white wealth gap in one fell swoop. Next slide, please. While this is technically possible, it would be very difficult for an individual state like California to provide that kind of reparations. For example, if California were to pay the roughly estimated 2 million Black non-Hispanic descendants of the enslaved in the US, again, a rough estimate of eligible recipients that lived in the state in 2019, that amount in reparations, it would spend $778.6 billion in 2019 dollars. However, the state's budget in 2019 was only, and I use only in quotation marks, $215 billion. Nowhere near enough to cover the expenses. From financial ruin. Next slide, please. But I'm going with a much more conservative interest rate of 3%. With that, I arrive at a 2019 estimate of $19.14 trillion. Next slide, please. I should mention that merely doubling the interest rate to the more realistic 6% would exponentially blow up the total estimates to $6.6 quadrillion 2019 dollars. Next slide, please. Thus, the interest rate will be the most important figure to negotiate between the descendant community and the federal government should such negotiations begin in earnest. Next slide. So let me stick with a 3% compound interest estimate of $19.14 trillion. Next slide. Now, the average amount of reparations owed per US resident can be estimated by using the US Bureau of the Census's count of the 2019 US population, which included approximately 328 million individuals. This includes everyone who at least indirectly benefits from the startup capital that slavery provided to the US economy today. It includes first-generation immigrants like myself, as well as African American descendants of the enslaved, as well as everybody else. each US resident would owe on average $58,302. African American descendants of the enslaved in the US would receive reparations in a larger amount, and the net amount, if you subtract that $58,000, would be $406,785 per eligible recipient in 2019 dollars. This means that wage-based reparations at only 3% interest would comfortably close the 2019 average per capita Black-white wealth gap of $358,293. Next slide. Of course, this only addresses losses due to withheld wages during US slavery and thus lost inheritances. What is missing is colonial slavery as well as post-slavery de jure anti-Black racial discrimination. And missing, according to Professor Swinton.
Wow, that's crazy. That figure was only, if I'm correct, what I heard is that was only for slavery. That doesn't even include colonial or post-slavery.
Just the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. Let's see. We're running a little low on time here. Do we want to finish up the subpoena?
Yeah, let's finish it up real
discussion? Quick. All right. What does it mean to issue a subpoena? Subpoena is a legal document which must be served on the recipient. The subpoena must provide a reasonable period for the person subpoenaed to respond. See due notice provision. The demand for information contained in the subpoena must be sufficiently definite for the person subpoenaed to understand what is expected for them in response. The subpoena should clearly state what the task force is requesting. The subpoena should have a defined time period for the information sought.
What does it mean to compel compliance? If an entity or person who is issued a subpoena refuses to provide the information sought by the subpoena, attorneys for the task force would have to file a petition to initiate a legal proceeding to enforce compliance. When the court makes a decision in the case, the court will ultimately determine what, if anything, the entity or person must provide to the task force. This process could take several months longer if there is an appeal.
Legal limits to subpoena power. Limits are ultimately determined by the court in an enforcement lawsuit. A court could determine that the information sought was not reasonably relevant or pertinent or material to the task force's mandate. See Bravelli. A court could also determine that certain legal privileges allow the subpoenaed entity or person to decline or disclose certain information. Privilege against self-incrimination does not extend to corporations or corporate custodians of records. Attorney-client privilege, spousal privilege, other evidentiary privileges.
The decisions for the task force. Should subpoenas be utilized? Choices for developing subpoenas. Pursuant to Government Code, Section 8301.3, the task force can delegate this authority to one member who can work with DOJ staff in the development and issuance of subpoenas. Pursuant to the same subdivision, the task force can create a subpoena subcommittee for the purpose of decision-making on subpoenas. This subcommittee would also be subject to the Bagley-Keene Act's open meeting requirements. And for those who aren't familiar with the Bagley-Keene, basically you can't have more than 2 people in one meeting. Then if it's more than 2 people, then basically you would be open, or basically you would be, foregoing the Bagley-Keene Act meeting requirements. Let's see. Or the task force can handle subpoenas as a whole body. Who or what entity should be subpoenaed? What information are you seeking to obtain?
Okay, so there's some subpoena power. Anybody out there who can think of any government agencies that they think deserve a subpoena, just shoot us, drop a comment, shoot us an email. try to get that information in front of the task force.
Yeah, you can hit us up at etmmediagroup@gmail.com. That's etmmediagroup@gmail.com. And this, and I believe, I could be wrong, but we need to find out if the subpoena also includes, which I think it did mention it, corporations.
Yeah, we need to figure that out, if that's open to corporations or just California agencies, because one of these slides seemed to say that it's for California agencies. But we will look further into that and report to you all the details. Yeah, so speaking of corporations, the banks definitely deserve a subpoena, and some of these other industries related to real estate, like the appraisers, housing appraisers, and unscrupulous agencies such as that. Let's take a listen to what Paul Austin had to say.
Traditionally, it has constantly happened, but now it's time for us to take those steps and right the wrongs. This is the opportunity now for us to look at reparations or damages for what has been done to the Black American from the time we was brought here. We are the only race that have not had an opportunity to be given what we deserve for all that we have done here in the United States. We constantly live through trauma that's been passed down from generation to generation, but we also have been the resilient people to constantly help build and fight for America. So my story, I can directly look at my grandparents and the struggle they went through, and look at the redlining issues that they had to deal with when they grew up. But for me to also have to deal with it 60 years later, 80 years later, it shouldn't constantly happen.
Yeah, I think he said his home was underappraised, what, $40,000-$50,000 or something like that?
No, that was a commenter that said their home was appraised at 40 or 50,000. His home was appraised at $500,000.
That's right. That's right. Thanks for the clarification.
Which is ridiculous. I'm like, that is a whole house, $500,000.
Yep. That's really unfortunate.
It is. All right. Well, we've got a couple more here, and then we'll let everyone get on with their evening.
National organization founded by myself and Ashanti Martin to help Black families reclaim stolen land through advocacy, research, and technology. Bruce's Beach has set a precedent, as it is the first time in U.S. history that land stolen from Black Americans has been returned. Since Governor Newsom signed SB 796, a bill introduced by Senator Bradford to allow for the transfer of the land from Los Angeles County to the Bruce family descendants, Whereas My Land has had an influx of families from around the nation asking us to aid them in their endeavors to get back stolen land from their ancestors, land stolen from their ancestors. While I am grateful the land is being returned to the Bruce family, the city of Manhattan Beach still has a debt to pay to the Bruces. The city of Manhattan Beach owes the Bruce family restitution for violating their civil and human rights and for stripping them of the opportunity to pass down generational wealth. Perhaps one way for this task force to consider light and the red, white, and blue light signaling for me to pull over, all because I'm driving while Black in a white neighborhood at night. Pay us for standing on the front lines overseas to fight your war, only to be assaulted for wearing an American uniform once we step back on U.S. soil. Pay me, and pay me handsomely. My hand will continue to choke pen as red ink from it bleeds, reminding me of Troy Anthony Davis, Marissa Alexander, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Archie Elliott, Oscar Grant, Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, Christopher DeAndre Mitchell, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. My hand will continue to choke pen and force it to bleed until I am deceased, or until this country has paid me for all they have stolen from me and for the Black keloid scars they've left on humanity.
So on that note, man, that was very interesting reparations meeting. Me personally, I think that was probably one of the most informative so far reparations task force meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They, touched on some industries, brought a lot of information, a lot of background information, and hopefully they'll just get more informative as we go along. Speaking of, the next task force meeting, is going to be on December 8th and 9th. It is a 2-day meeting, December 8th and 9th. So we hope you will all tune in for that. And join us right here at ETM Media. We'll be live streaming the whole thing.
And before we actually get out of here, we are going to be in the building in Oakland, California, November 6th from 2 to 4 p.m. If you are in the Bay Area or surrounding areas, please come through. Please come through. Really appreciate your support. Hopefully, we're going to get somebody from the task force there physically, but if not, we'll have somebody virtually. So that is the plan. I don't know if it's going to happen, but hopefully there will be somebody either virtually in the building or physically in the building. You can go to Eventbrite. It might be up there for more information. But once again, that's going to be at Oakland at the, looks like at the one of the Oakland library branches from 2 to 4. That's November 6th, 2021, and that is on a Saturday. Which, by the way, currently the California Task Force does not have meetings on weekends, which is one of the requests that have been made. But so far, they are still sticking with the weekday meetings.
But we are, keeping the pressure on them to make a change on that. And we know a lot of people work during the week, and you can't, take 8 hours out of your day to sit through a task force meeting. So we're trying to make sure that at least, 1 or 2 of the meetings are accessible to more people who have more time on the weekends. So that's the plan. So we'll just leave you with another redistricting PSA. Redistricting here in Sacramento is taking place and across the nation. It happens in accordance with the census. So we just had a census, and now they're going to be redrawing district lines in Sacramento and, like I said, other cities. And it is something to watch, because that's how, some of this gentrification happens. They just redistrict these regions when nobody's paying attention. The next thing you know, the Black hood is a white hood. So keep an eye on that, and see you next time.
Peace.